Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about The Last Day?
And it's a film that I wrote loosely based on Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the book or not, but maybe I'll just summarize the book briefly so that you understand what I did. Um, the book takes place in a day, and it was written after World War One, and it describes a bourgeois housewife, Clarissa Dalloway, going about her errands in her day at 50, about to throw a big party for her husband in the evening. She has an 18-year-old daughter that's kind of separating and rejecting her. And there's a foil character who's equally important in the book named Septimus Smith, who's a World War One vet, who Clarissa sort of passes by. It's almost like sliding doors throughout the day. And he's suffering from severe PTSD from World War One. And at the end of the day, Clarissa throws a party, and at the end of the day, he kills himself. I had read the book in high school and not thought about it much again. And then had always been into Virginia Woolf, and that was that. And one day I was at I have two kids, and I was getting our Tesla fixed in Red Hook at the Tesla dealership. And I was texting my friend sitting there in the waiting room, and she's like, "Oh, what a Mrs. Dalloway day you're having." And I was like, "Oh, yeah. What? Am I Mrs. Dalloway? Let me think about that." So I read it again, and I was completely blown away. And as a mother reading it, I now understood the book totally differently than I understood it as a 16-year-old, because the obviously the perspective and consciousness changes, as that's what Virginia Woolf does. But now I was sitting in Clarissa's position.
Mhm.
Obviously, I'm not 50 and my kids aren't 18, but I was feeling her pain, her rudderlessness, her sense of loss of identity, all the kind of acts of self actualization she had reversed or given up in exchange for her motherhood. I was incredibly moved. And so I decided to transpose it into a modern day New York story. And the Septimus character I transposed into a labor and delivery nurse that was suffering from severe postpartum depression,
Oh, wow.
which is something that I also suffered from.
Yeah.
So I kind of, in different ways, felt myself in the different character.
So much of what I've understood about your work prior to this moment is like larger systems in which we find ourselves, in which humans find themselves. And it feels like this movie is a shift to the kind of, rather than the external weather, it's like internal weather. And I know it's just a matter of like what the focus is. They're all sort of like kind of a Ouroboros of sorts. But did it feel like a shift? Did you feel like you were going into something more intimate with the film?
Before making the film and also before having children,
Uh-huh.
so much of my experience in making works was a combination of, like, I'm feeling this thing. For example, I'm feeling really anxious. Could I attach it? Now, of course, there's all kinds of internal reasons why I might be feeling anxiety, to do with nothing to do with, let's say, the weather or something.
Sure.
But can I attach it to something I'm spotting outside, and make the artwork the container for that connection?
Mm-hmm.
So the work was always coming from something that always began with a personal feeling. But the difference is that you're right to point out, in this film, it doesn't go beyond that. I guess if you're talking about motherhood, but the film isn't like a political comment on motherhood structurally in society. It's
Right.
actually totally not that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so yeah,
There's
that's correct what you're
the
saying.
like there was a moment in an interview, I can't remember who you were talking to, but you were talking about the process that you go through to make anything, which is almost like you're a sensor, like not a sensor CEN, but like a sensor that's like feeling things around you. And then as soon as you feel it and kind of like know that you're feeling something that's like worth noticing, that you almost zoom out to like see what the feeling is doing.
I've done it in some really rudimentary, kind of almost stupid ways. Like, if I think back,
I love stupid.
I mean, a different version of this, in a way, like, this film, The Last Day, that I made, is me contending with my ambivalence, um, confusion, pain around, and ecstasy around being a mother. Um, for me, like, that's why I made it, to kind of figure something about that out, and give voice to a crisis I feel many other women experience, but we don't there aren't clear places to put that necessarily. But for example, if I think back to when I made Lake Valley when I was 28, that was a work that I made in the beginning of my Saturn return, actually, like just the year after I had Whitney show, and I was beginning this new stage of like, oh, like I'm a working artist now and I have a career and I'm like a grown up. And of course, we all become grown-ups to a certain extent when we're 18 and we leave home. But then there's this kind of like second thing, which is your Saturn return. We probably, many of us know it, where you experience a new version of adulthood. Like, what's this thing gonna look like?
Hmm.
So, like, this work came from that, like questioning what does it mean to turn 28, actually. I mean, it sounds so honestly trivial, but at the time, it didn't feel trivial to me. It felt somehow kind of big.
28. I guess I thought you were older at that time because I guess there's so much that's related to childhood here
Yeah.
that I guess now it makes sense that it is a reckoning of like the idea of like leaving childish things behind, but then also those things sort of translating into this kind of really like, as you're going to see in a second, this very baroque visual language of like all these different ways of storytelling kind of coming together. So before we continue, let's just play this
Yeah.
excerpt. This is an excerpt from Lake Valley from 2016.
10 years ago. So, yeah. So, I mean, just to give like the texture of this, at the time I found and then scanned tons of like early children's, the kind of early proliferation of children's books, like 18th or early 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what all these textures, the surfacing of everything is made up from that, like hand collaging, well, on Photoshop, but collaging these layers.
And it's kind of the story of this, I mean, rabbit-ish figure that kind of goes on this, like gets lost essentially.
Yeah. Lives in like a suburban housing development and goes actually into like the little tiny greenery right next to the house, but then it imagines it as though it's this forest, but it's kind of just a whatever space. And much of this was a kind of return to how childhood is formed,
Mm-hmm.
like culturally. And that it's kind of a modern invention. Like even the idea of the storybook is so modern. Like
Hmm.
this coincides with the Industrial Revolution. The idea that you sit down and read your kids a book and that there's an illustrated thing that they look at. This is like a totally recent thing.
So
And
this bit of like that structure that seems like part of the scaffolding of this, like before that, what was the what was the feeling that started this project?
Saturn return, uh, becoming an adult, understanding ourselves through our childhood, which is a very recent, super recent idea. I mean, Freud, that's like extremely recent, but even the idea that there's a separation between childhood and adulthood and that we define ourselves as different is also very recent.
Hmm.
So I was questioning like, why do I now feel like an adult and I didn't before, and what does that mean, like in the history of where we are today? So
Right.
that was the inception.
And then getting into that history takes you into industrial revolution and like the foundations of how we start thinking about that separation.
Yes. And then separately, which is true for all my work, I also always have a thing I want to learn how to do, I don't know how to do. This is to me like an essential project and point of making an artwork. I don't know how to do it. And when I complete the work, I might know a little bit more about how to do it. So in this case, I'd never done an animation before, so I had no
Right.
idea how to do it. And actually, I don't think I had ever written a proper script because up until this point, the 2 or 3 works I had made had been basically like essays. I mean, I'd written them like
Right.
that. And this one, because it was an animation, I had to storyboard everything. So
Hmm.
I had to write a very clear script. So it was actually the first time I ever wrote a script.
What did that feel like?
I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. So it was that, and then it was the storyboarding, and then it was working on an animation,
Okay.
a traditional animation. This is hand drawn.
So let's go back even further
Yeah,
because you went to art school and you went in for painting,
yeah,
but then started like moving into film seemingly suddenly. Like,
yeah.
was it like, okay, now I can't think in this medium anymore?
Yeah, it was like I mean, I got obliterated like in all the crits everyone hated on everything I did, and I felt so bad about myself all the time, which wouldn't necessarily happen in this. But yeah, I felt so bad about myself all the time, and I felt like, why do I have to feel bad about myself for this pointless thing? I don't think painting's pointless, but I felt,
You have a painting show that's opening in like a
yes,
few
I
days.
don't think the painting is pointless. But at the time, I felt in major existential crisis.
Right.
And when I say this is pointless, I meant like all of art making, like
Okay.
start to finish. What am I doing here? I want to do something meaningful with my life. I want to affect change. I want to contribute. Why? What can you do in art? Seemingly like nothing. So, so
There's
we,
the takeaway.
yeah. Well, no, I mean that's the crisis that I had at that
Yeah.
point. And then I thought, oh, if I became a documentary filmmaker, that could be like politically actionable.
Hmm.
And so then I started learning how to make films like immediately. Then thinking that when I graduated, I would try to make my way into the documentary film world. So the best thing I could do is like learn all the skills I could in the meantime.
One, did it come as a shock to your professors at the time? And two, like when you started making that first video piece that you thought was going to be a documentary, when did you know it wasn't?
I knew it wasn't when I started editing,
Uh-huh.
but not up until that point. I was driving around, shooting this footage, doing these interviews. I I didn't understand how much it wasn't a documentary film until I started editing, which was the first time I ever edited anything.
Uh-huh.
And I just fell in love with the medium. Like I felt like this is it. This is me. I've been waiting all this time. And I was in the middle of my almost second to last semester of school at that point. It was like, let's say November of my last year when I was finally editing. So I was like, oh my God, this is it. Like, I love this medium so much.
Did everybody in the crits just like shut the fuck up?
I mean, I wasn't showing anything at that point because I didn't have anything to show. I was just like working on my project or whatever.
Right,
Like,
right. But then you
yeah.
had a final piece.
Yeah. No, I don't know. But I wasn't, but I guess what I'm saying is I fell so in love with editing. I felt like this is my voice. This is like, you know,
I mean, I
um,
that's when I met you, when you were graduating from
that's
graduate
right.
school.
That's when we met because you
And
were in that show.
I was, yeah, I was in the show that Ian was
Yes.
in and at
And I
PS1.
was coming over and bothering you guys during the install. I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. So Rachel's married to Ian Chang, another artist. They both show at Gladstone, an amazing artist in his own right. And we were in that show together, and Rachel was asking for studio visits from everyone.
Yes, I'm sure I was. And Josh came and
Yeah,
changed my life.
that I believe it. It was like every person you were like, I'd love to show you this.
Yeah.
I'd love to show you this. And I was like, wow, okay,
It was that
she's
work.
on it. Yeah, and I remember seeing it, and I was like, this is her first video piece. That's stupid. Like that's it was it really blew me away. It really towed that line. Like I hadn't seen that much video art that felt borderline popular.
Mm,
Like that it that could have been released in a gallery. It could also be released by Vice. Like it
mm,
felt like it had the makings of something that were highly specific and rigorous and like think like in that particular piece it was thinking about like the border slash limit of life and death, like what happens in that transition, what are the how do we codify those things, and seeing it, it really shocked me, like you were so proficient in doing this so quickly. It's yeah, it's obvious that that was your voice, like it was a no-brainer.
I mean, I remember that feeling. I felt like high during that period because I felt like after all this time of feeling like I I actually wasn't an artist, like I was wrong, and it was time to pivot, then I found this medium that felt like I could channel myself through it. Like, and at the time also in the art world there was a place for making work like that. But
Yeah, for
there
sure.
there was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's changed now, but at the time there was.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like your rise was in a moment when new media and video was being shown constantly, and like now it's harder to come by exhibitions like that and people that are going to put the money into it,
Yeah.
because what you can't see in this excerpt, and the other ones that will likely show, is that your videos are installed incredibly specifically. Actually, we can just see it on the website. Did you know that, like, in grad school, was that already something that you were thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I had this kind of position, I guess, at the time about hanging around in the art world, which is like, okay, if I'm going to do this, if these things are going to be shown in exhibition spaces and not black boxes, then I should really use the exhibition space for what it can offer. Had screens made out of tapestries and I don't know, I carpets and all kinds of ways that particularly address the way that the film sat in the space. So yeah, this was at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and we wrapped the room. You can't see it in these images really, but the room is wrapped in this scrim, just the same scrim that we're projecting on, but it's double wrapped. So it created this kind of moire effect with the light, and that moire effect was also in the film. So things like experimenting with things like that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, your, uh, I guess it was your first, your first solo exhibition was at the Whitney Museum, um, and even there, it was like the scrim and the way that light was coming through the room, and then also how, like, yeah, you couldn't call it site specific, but it was site sensitive.
It was that's exactly the word. Like I went in and actually like edited and played with the blacks and stuff in the space and yeah, so the idea was that when there was black on the screen, it would be porous because obviously that is a dim projection of light, and you would see the outside world. So it was I projected a scrim that was in front of a glass, and the whole film was about sort of like what we can access and what we can't in light and sound is obviously biologically determined. But what does it mean to take like our biological form and extract it from this one? Like, let's say you become an astronaut or something. Um, what can you see and hear differently? Like, can you extend the limits of human perceptual capacities, not through drugs or alcohol or whatever else, but through just moving our body into a different environment off of the earth?
And what was the thing that you wanted to learn in this piece?
Well, this piece came out of something like really simple, actually. I don't know if it was a thing I wanted to learn, but it was a feeling I wanted to explore, which is that Ian and I had gone to see Gravity in Battery Park City. And when we left, we walked home uh, to the Bowery where we lived at the time. And I can remember it exactly now, the feeling of leaving the theater and walking on the street and being like, looking at the street signs and the traffic lights and just like New York City laid bare and feeling actually very alienated from it.
Hmm.
And it taking that walk or maybe a few blocks of that walk to kind of resettle like, okay, no, actually, we never left America. We never left New York City. We were here the whole time because I found that film so transportive and seeing it in the theater so transportive, which I think is something to do with the way it was shot and the time and the moment. And then I remember saying to Ian, like, it's so weird that just sound and light did this to me or to
Hmm.
us. Like, that's all it was. We were just sitting in a black box, listening and looking. And yet, a street light feels alien to me.
Right.
So I started to like wonder about that, about sound and light and how it enters the body and what it can do to us.
And seeing if you could conjure something similar.
Yes, but first I think I was interested in like what are the extremes of this?
Hmm.
And so then I heard this interview with this astronaut about a spacewalk he had done in outer space when he was repairing the International Space Station, and the Earth was on the night side. So I guess when the Earth is on the night side, the Earth is nothing, not something. Like it just looks black.
Okay.
Um, at least that's how he described it. Maybe it's something about the position of the sun. I can't remember the details of it, but it was like a void.
Sure.
And so he described this experience of like total blackness in outer space and then what it's like to come back to earth as an astronaut, which many astronauts have talked about, but
Right.
having to relearn how to walk, how color is different, sounds feel different.
It
Um,
felt like it almost feels like a microcosm of how you think about an artwork in general, because there's something about compression and distortion that happens repeatedly,
Yeah,
where using compression and distortion is a way to unground your viewer and to have them see the world anew again, where there's something liquid and something destabilizing that's like kind of it's you're using extreme experiences sometimes, but it's to induce the vertigo of the everyday.
that's right. So like that image on the screen, then I got really interested in like Douglas Trumbull and this early special effects designers, from 2001 Space Odyssey, and actually how homegrown and simple these effects were. So like that's just milk and ink.
Yeah.
Um, and like and learning how simply you can, suggest something
No, the
otherworldly.
effects are like, so there's just a lot of liquids that Rachel was kind of mixing together, and when you see them, it's so alchemical. Like it really does. I mean, especially in the age that we live in today, you would just assume that it's rendered. Like it doesn't look like real.
Right. But it's just literally was in my kitchen. Like it's just that's all it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was really interested in that, which I think is similar to this thing of like I was actually just at the movies. Many of us probably saw Gravity. Like it's not that big of a deal. But but it can also like change your relationship
Yeah.
to living for a second, and that's meaningful.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, outside of how a documentary can potentially move politics, if it does, I
Right.
depends what we're thinking right now, and like maybe the world is past documentary help.
Yeah.
Um, but there's also that feeling that art can be a transcendent experience that like pushes you out of your body into a place where you can experience yourself in the world in a very different way. And those are very life-changing experiences. And I remember when I interviewed you during COVID, um, I asked you whether you've had transcendent experiences with a work of art, and you did. You like adamantly, you were like, yes, 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 yes. I've had many, and one that you mentioned was a story by Joyce Carol Oates, and
Maybe I was reading it at the time.
you had just finished reading it.
Oh
It was a short
yeah.
story called Feral,
Yes.
and
I can't even remember this.
oh man, it was intense because you kind of narrated the
Yeah.
story,
Sorry.
and then you were like, I want to cut that. But it's a story of a couple that have been trying to have a kid for quite a long time. They finally do. They're so pleased. The child's very calm and pleasant and lovely, and then unfortunately drowns almost. The child's revived, and his demeanor is completely different. He's like a feral child. He's running around constantly, escaping every situation, almost demonic. And throughout this, what you described is like the language is very like simple, not flat, but just like simple and matter of fact. And then in this last section where the child disappears and runs out into the woods, um, all of a sudden it's like time is distended and every single thing is described in high definition.
Right.
And the end of the story is that you see the child howling in the woods with other children.
It's such a crazy, beautiful story. Thank you for reminding me of that.
And it made me think of Weapons. If you saw
Yes.
that,
Yes.
that came to mind, and I was curious if that director had seen that. If you haven't seen Weapons, it's really worth seeing.
Yeah.
Um, but it also just tapped me into that feeling of like distension, distortion, and all of these things that like it made perfect sense to me why that would be one of those experiences that had that effect on you, because it feels like a feeling that you chase too.
What's cool about that story that I forgot about, um, is that as a reader, when you're reading it, the whole time you're in the position of the parents, right? I can't remember exactly whose consciousness you're in,
Hmm.
but you're in their position.
Yeah,
So you're like, why? Maybe you're in the mom. I can't remember.
I think you are.
Okay,
Yeah.
you're like, why? She's just, it's like all the bad stuff that's happening to her because of her messed up kid. And this kind of loss and like what happened to my kid? He's brain damaged, the water, and you're in this whole like detective story about like, can she get him back? You know, when's he going to release her to love her again or whatever? And then at the very end, it's revealed like this way bigger thing's been happening the whole time. And like, who knows what happened under the water? Maybe it was just a little thing, it's meaningless, or maybe he was down there and he met a spirit, or maybe there were, you know what I mean? It's like, it just flips the whole relationship to the problem that you've been following the whole time.
That's that's so weird that I didn't think about that moment in the water. Like I guess I assume that it's like a life and death experience, but when you said who knows what happened in the water, it like kind of gave me goosebumps because it is this something happened in the water
Or not,
or not.
or nothing happened and he was born.
Have you had any transcendent experiences recently with the work of art?
I have had two in the
Okay.
past like 4 days, which is very unusual because I don't know if it's like a lot of you guys, but they go long stretches of just nothing. I saw Anna Teresa de Keersmacher, this choreographer, Belgian choreographer, on Thursday night. I mean, I don't need to paraphrase the whole piece, but it just completely blew my mind, so much so that I got Ian a ticket to go alone on Friday night, and he made him go because I was like, our relationship needs you to see this. It's like, I can't be the only one who saw this. That's the level of masterpiece I thought it was. And then on Sunday we took our kids to see Hoppers, which also is just mind blowing. Maybe it's like a Pocahontas story or an Avatar story. Like, now we're in the animal world and we're here to save the animals, and like people are bad and they're violent. They're like there to destroy nature, and like we hope that humans will learn a lesson or something. And maybe this transfer, it kind of exactly Avatar or Pocahontas. That's what you
Sure.
think the movie is.
Yeah.
And then it just weaves into something much more complex and a kind of forgiveness and empathy for human behavior, and locating it within the kinds of needs for the kinds of drives that all animals have in different degrees, and is principled and organized in different ways. And in the end, sort of offers like human destruction and behavior, like an enormous amount of empathy.
Huh.
And so it's like super complicated movie. I really don't know how it got made.
In thinking about animal consciousness and thinking about witches and thinking about all the things that start to get banished from the world because there's a particular kind of colonial rationality and also the beginnings of capitalism that are happening in this moment. I mean, this is the grounds for, I mean, that's the title of the film is Enclosure, and I'm sure you can speak to that um, in terms of what that means for that sort of proto-capitalist moment. But I'm going to show this first.
Yes, my moon. These marks require me to become the cheery faithful.
What are we looking at?
You see, the nobles have begun clearing the woods, and this brings out bears who need to eat. And one female bear became obsessed with killing me. One day, when I saw her scratching at a tree, I fired a poison arrow at her heart, but she didn't go down. Sheltered beneath her was a cub, dead, blackened in ash from some hellish fire. A man-made flame, no doubt, and she carried that burnt corpse around with her everywhere. How is it, did you think I lost my home and child? This is not Invention. Would you not, too, hunt the god that killed your child for no reason?
Do not be deceived, my dear. No paper of blue can derail our ascension. Jupiter is in you, in your
A man-made flame, no doubt.
the light,
Would you not, too, hunt the god who
moist,
killed
the
your
dry,
child for
the
no
color
reason?
of that, and you are here.
This is not the first
Now, to receive my dear.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that people thought about healing other people during this time was through transferring consciousnesses into bodies of animals. So, if someone was sick with the flu and nothing was working, they might kill a goat. I don't remember the minutia of it, but kill a goat and stick the goat next to the person to try to like transfer the death into another body, for example, or the illness into another body.
Like when you were talking about the graciousness that is given to human destruction, when I was thinking about Will-O-Wisp and thinking about enclosure and just thinking about this story that's being kind of unraveled about the beginnings of a capitalist logic and like a you know rampant colonial expansion from that moment, it's a Western story. It's one that like is the spine of like the how the Western world saw itself and decided to
Yeah.
civilize the rest of the world. And for a moment I was like, fuck this story. I don't care about this story. And I was like, well, then why tell this story? And on the one hand, I think very often like critiques come from bad faith when they try to critique from something that they should never have expected that particular artist to do. Um, and so then I caught myself where it's like, okay, well then you go make something. But what's happening here that's of value? And when you connected it to the Pixar film, it really made a lot like it kind of like it started to sparkle a little bit in my head where it's like there's empathy and like there's a world here where you're like, damn, everybody's just kind of subjected to all these things, and it even though there are like larger forces at work, something very human and delicate and fragile and sad, pathetic, beautiful. However, like I think there's a lot of emotions that happen when even when we watch a clip like that, completely decontextualized, like there's a lot of feelings that happen that allow us to connect larger swaths of history to something that's very, very local, even if it's like both historical and fabricated. And then you have a show that's opening this week at Gladstone Gallery, which is called The Rest. How you're thinking about landscape and politics and the stories that we tell ourselves, but again, through this sort of distorted lens, these really kind of beautiful paintings. Like, I don't think I've actually seen one of these in person, so I'm excited to see it in
They're
person.
small.
Yeah, they're like,
Yeah, they're a little big, but they're small. I mean, this is something I've been working on for maybe like 3 or 4 years. This specific kind of, it's not actually in the Bible, but this allegory of the rest on the flight into Egypt, which is this moment, which has been depicted like throughout European Western painting from like Caravaggio to Patinier, Flemish to Southern, everywhere, of Mary and Jesus and Joseph fleeing. At basically running to safety in Egypt as Herod's army is on their back trying to persecute and capture them. And Jesus, I think, is 3 days old.
oh,
And so she's like a breastfeeding, very new mother.
oh shit.
And there's this moment, it's called The Rest on the Flight into Egypt, where they stop to rest. And Joseph gets them food. And usually there's a water source. And this usually symbolically there's this hay field that sprouts up automatically, and you see Herod's army is blocked, they can't find them, and Mary sits in the center just breastfeeding Jesus calmly, and at her feet often grow the exact herbs that she needs to like feed him and feed herself.
Damn.
And yeah, there's this thing where the tree branch bends down to give Joseph the exact olive, or depending on where they are, pear, whatever that he needs to give for her, and the donkey just waits there, and everything is perfect for her and for this moment. And it's a kind of time warp space thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've interpreted the allegory many different ways
Yeah.
in different shows and different ways of working with the paintings. And in this show, I decided to reset the allegory in Northern Westchester now from the perspective of Mary. So taking Mary, Joseph, and Jesus out and looking at the kind of symbolic elements that she looks at in the painting
Mm-hmm.
as transposed to Northern Westchester now, and kind of experiencing the world from her perspective in that moment. So that's what
Beautiful.
the show is.
Go see the show. It opens on Friday.
Yeah, that's it.